I still remember the way they laughed when the manager handed me my key card. My daughter Sonia and her husband Darius strutted toward their oceanfront suite. My son Malcolm and his wife Felicia giggled about their deluxe balcony room. And Clifton, my husband of nearly 50 years, reminded everyone that he deserved nothing less than the presidential suite. And me, they gave me room 109, the smallest room in the hotel, pressed against the service hallway with the thrum of laundry machines shaking the walls. "You'll be fine here, Mom," Malcolm said, smirking as if I were a stray they had to make space for. Felicia added with a laugh, "Close to the laundry. Perfect, isn't it? She practically lives in there anyway." Sonia's eyes slid over me, lingering on my hips and arms before she turned away with a shake of her head. "At least it's ground floor," she whispered to Darius. No need for her to strain herself climbing stairs. Their laughter echoed in the corridor long after they disappeared toward the elevators. I took the key card without a word. My husband didn't even bother to glance back at me. He was too busy bragging about how the hotel staff should recognize the ward name, how he'd built his family from nothing into something worth envying. The irony was suffocating, but I kept my smile tucked away just as I always had. Inside the room, the air smelled of bleach and steam. A single bed, a window facing the service dock, and the constant groan of the machines next door. A room designed for the invisible, for the unimportant. I laid my suitcase on the bed and sat down, my body sinking into the thin mattress as I listened to the dull thuds of dryers spinning towels for people far more deserving. But what they didn't notice, what they had never cared to notice, were the looks exchanged by the staff. When the manager handed me my key, his hand lingered, his eyes filled with something almost apologetic. The chef in the lobby, carrying trays toward the banquet hall, had paused to nod at me with a respect that my own family had never shown. They didn't laugh. They didn't smirk. They knew. I was the only one in the room who knew the truth, and the only one patient enough to let them keep digging their own graves. This year's family vacation was going to be different. Before I proceed, let me know where you are watching from. The welcome dinner was meant to be the highlight of the family vacation, a grand occasion where everyone gathered under the chandeliers of the hotel's main dining hall. To my family, it was a stage. To me, it was another reminder of how easily they dismissed me. I sat at the end of the table, partly hidden by a tall arrangement of roses, as though my presence itself was something to be decorated around. Clifton lifted his glass, commanding the room with that booming voice of his, the one he used to dominate boardrooms and family gatherings alike. "A toast," he declared, his chest puffed like a man half his age. "To my children, Sonia and Malcolm, my true legacy, the ones who've carried the ward name with honor and success." Applause rang out, led by Sonia's husband, Darius, whose smirk widened as he clinked glasses with anyone within reach. Felicia, Malcolm's wife, leaned close to him, whispering something that made them both snicker before sipping their wine. I remained quiet, my glass untouched, watching Clifton conveniently forget that his wife of nearly 50 years sat 3 chairs away. Sonia wasted no time stepping into the spotlight her father had created. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with pride. "It's been a good year. The Hendricks firm just secured another contract downtown. Darius and I are already looking at a second house in Oakmont Estates." She glanced down the table, her eyes brushing past me with the same cold dismissal she had perfected since her teenage years. Second house. Malcolm scoffed with mock incredulity. You'll be chasing me and Felicia at this rate. We're already closing on our third rental property. And my consultancy? Thriving. The city can't get enough of my expertise. Isn't that right, honey? Felicia laughed on cue, tossing her braids over her shoulder. Of course, baby. Unlike some people, we don't waste money on, she paused, looking at me pointedly. Little hobbies. It's all about returns and real investments. The laughter that followed was casual, effortless, like the sound of people who never once considered the cruelty of their words. My plate sat in front of me, a simple garden salad with grilled chicken, my choice out of comfort. But Darius eyed it like it was a punchline waiting to be delivered. Just salad, he said, his tone mocking. Come on, Mrs. Ward. Don't tell me the menu's too pricey for you. We'll pitch in if it means you can enjoy a real meal. Felicia giggled, covering her mouth dramatically. No, don't embarrass her. She's just practical. Isn't that the word? Simple tastes. Cheap tastes, Sonia corrected, sipping her wine with a satisfied smirk. Mom's always been that way. Never knew how to appreciate the finer things. Clifton laughed along, pride swelling in his chest as if his children's arrogance were proof of his own success. They didn't get that from you, Eudora. They got that drive from me. I sat still, the knife and fork poised in my hands, not because I was ready to defend myself, but because I knew silence was my greatest weapon. Sarai, my granddaughter, slid her small hand into mine under the table. Her brother, Micah, sat beside her, glaring at his father Malcolm with a sharpness beyond his years. Grandma likes salad, Sarai said softly, her voice barely above the clatter of silverware, but loud enough for the table to hear. She makes the best salad at home. I like it better than steak. Micah nodded, his young voice carrying more weight than he knew. Yeah, and she taught me how to make dressing from scratch. Not everything has to be expensive to be good. The table fell awkwardly silent for a moment, their laughter muted by the innocence of children who still recognized value where adults had long lost sight of it. Sonia rolled her eyes. Malcolm cleared his throat, and Felicia quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. For the first time that evening, I felt seen, not by the ones who claimed to love me, but by the only ones who mattered. I lowered my gaze to Sarai and Micah, offering them a smile that never quite reached the rest of the table. While the others boasted and bragged, I sat quietly, my heart steady. The truth was, I could have ordered the most expensive meal on that menu. I could have bought the entire restaurant 10 times over. But that wasn't the point. The point was patience. And patience was a weapon they would never see coming. The next morning, the hotel staff moved with their usual precision. Trays of fruit and coffee balanced gracefully, linen napkins folded like origami on every plate. My family gathered at a prime table near the window overlooking the beach. I, of course, had been directed toward the far end of the arrangement, close enough to be present, but never important enough to be centered. It should have been a moment for my children to shine again. Sonia with her plans to redecorate her Oakmont home, Malcolm boasting about his latest consultancy deal. But what caught my attention, and eventually theirs, were the quiet gestures from the staff. When Hector Alvarez, the hotel manager, walked in, he greeted the table as any professional would. He shook Clifton's hand with polite formality, acknowledged Sonia and Malcolm with a nod, and offered Felicia and Darius the briefest of smiles. Then his eyes met mine. His posture shifted. He lowered his head just slightly, a subtle bow that no one else at the table received. "Mrs. Ward," he said warmly, "I trust your room was adequate last night?" The words hung in the air. My family froze for a split second before Clifton answered for me. "She's fine," he said dismissively. "She doesn't need much. Just 4 walls and a bed, right, Eudora?" His chuckle encouraged the others to laugh along, though some glanced at Hector as though trying to measure what they'd just seen. I smiled faintly, careful not to let more slip. "Yes," I replied softly. "The room was just fine." Hector's bow lingered a moment longer before he straightened and moved on, but his respect had already unsettled the dynamic at the table. Later, as plates were being cleared, Chef Reggie Thompson himself emerged from the kitchen. It was unusual. The head chef rarely appeared in the dining room unless greeting VIP guests. My family noticed immediately. "Good morning," Reggie said, his voice steady but carrying weight. He walked straight past Sonia's plate piled with croissants, past Malcolm's half-finished omelet, and stopped in front of me. "Mrs. Ward, was the breakfast to your liking? We took care to prepare the salad just the way you enjoy." The table went quiet again. Felicia tilted her head, frowning. "You know her salad preference?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. Reggie glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to me. "Mrs. Ward is always precise with her tastes. We respect that." He gave a short nod, then excused himself. Whispers started before he was even out of earshot. Darius leaned close to Sonia, muttering, "Why does the chef care about her salad? Since when does the staff know her like that?" "Probably just pity," Felicia replied quickly, though her eyes flickered with doubt. "They probably feel sorry for her. Look at the room she's in. Maybe they're compensating." Clifton let out a scoffing laugh. "Don't read too much into it. These people get paid to flatter. That's all it is. Nothing more." He waved his hand, dismissing the oddity, and raised his glass as if to reset the conversation. But I noticed the side glances. My cousins at the far end of the table had been whispering too, their curiosity piqued by the unusual respect I had received. Daniela, especially, always the one to watch and analyze, narrowed her eyes and studied me carefully before leaning to whisper in her sister's ear. The moment passed, smoothed over by more boasting from Sonia and Malcolm, but a seed had been planted. Suspicion, small and fragile, had found its place in their minds. And unlike laughter, suspicion has a way of growing quietly until it demands to be acknowledged. I lifted my fork, speared a piece of melon from my plate, and ate slowly. Their conversations washed over me in waves. Contracts, houses, vacations, investments. All noise. What mattered were the silences in between, the spaces where doubt had begun to creep in. For the first time in years, my family's confidence wasn't absolute. They didn't know it yet, but cracks had started to appear, and I had every intention of letting them widen. That evening, after the family scattered to their suites, I returned to my small, humming room by the laundry. The laughter from dinner still echoed in my ears, their voices dripping with pride and arrogance. But once the door shut behind me, silence fell, and I reached for the leather satchel I had tucked deep into my suitcase. Inside were the letters, yellowed, worn, and folded with the kind of care only a secret could demand. They were my grandfather's words, preserved across decades. Letters he began writing to me the day Clifton first entered our family, long before anyone suspected what kind of man he would become. Eudora, one began, his penmanship elegant and precise. You must always keep what I give you separate. A man like Clifton thrives on control, not partnership. He will smile when it suits him, but he will never see you as his equal. For that reason, I have placed the deeds of the Miramar property in your name and only yours. Guard them carefully. They are your shield. I traced the lines with my fingertips, hearing his voice in every word. He had built the hotel from nothing, brick by brick, guest by guest, long before my parents were even born. It was his pride, his crown jewel, and though he loved his children, he never trusted their judgment when it came to business. Another letter, dated years later, was even sharper. By now you have seen Clifton's arrogance. Do not be fooled into thinking it will soften with age. Men like him harden with time. Do not yield your inheritance to him. He will squander it or use it to bind you. Keep it locked, even from your children if you must. There will come a day when they will reveal whether they value you or your wealth. Only then will you know what to do. I leaned back against the headboard, the dull thrum of machines on the other side of the wall blending into the rhythm of my grandfather's warnings. He had seen through Clifton from the beginning, calling him ambitious to a fault, clever but careless, and driven by appearances more than substance. And he had been right. Through Bernard Knox, his trusted lawyer, my grandfather had ensured the transfer of not just the hotel, but a string of investments, shares, properties, even a dormant account that had quietly multiplied over the years. All of it was mine, hidden behind my quiet name. My husband never suspected, my children never questioned. To them, I was just Mom, or worse, the woman who lived in Clifton's shadow. I remembered the last conversation I had with my grandfather just weeks before his death. He sat in his study, the scent of pipe smoke hanging heavy, his hands frail, but steady as they gripped mine. Don't give them everything, he told me, his eyes piercing even as his body weakened. One day, Eudora, you will see who they truly are. When that day comes, you'll be glad you kept something for yourself. That day had arrived. I had spent years wondering if I had been wrong to stay silent, if keeping secrets from my own husband, from my own children, was nothing more than cowardice. But as I remembered their laughter at dinner, the way they mocked my food, my clothes, even my very body, I understood. My silence hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy. Folding the letters carefully, I slid them back into the satchel and closed the clasp. My grandfather had trusted me with more than assets. He had trusted me with his legacy, his vision, and most importantly, his judgment. I exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down and then lifting just slightly. They thought I was nothing. They thought I was forgotten. But the truth, written in my grandfather's own hand, was that I had always been the one holding everything together. And when the moment came, I would be the one to decide how it all unraveled. The poolside was buzzing with activity that morning, laughter and splashes echoing against the white stone walls of the resort. Sunlight shimmered off the water, catching in the glasses of champagne that staff carried to every corner for guests basking in their leisure. My family occupied the prime cabanas near the edge of the infinity pool, spread out as though they owned the place. Clifton reclined in a lounger, his sunglasses tilted low, one hand lazily holding a glass of bourbon. I arrived quietly, clutching the spa pass that had been slipped under my door the night before. It was supposed to be for a full body treatment, a gesture that for a fleeting second made me believe maybe, just maybe, my family had thought of me. But as I reached the check-in desk by the spa entrance, the attendant looked flustered. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ward," she said, flipping through her tablet. "It looks like your appointment was canceled this morning." "Canceled?" I repeated calmly. "Yes, it was marked here as unnecessary. The premium slot was reassigned." I didn't have to ask who had made that decision. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Felicia stretched across her lounger, the diamond on her finger glinting as she adjusted her sun hat. She glanced my way with a smirk that told me everything. "Problem at the desk, Mother," she called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It seems my reservation's been canceled," I answered, careful not to let my tone rise. Felicia's smirk deepened. "Oh, don't worry about it. Those treatments aren't really designed for everyone. The tables are narrow. Wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable." The words cut sharper than any blade. She tilted her head towards Sonia, who snorted into her mimosa. Malcolm laughed outright, loud and carefree, as if his wife had delivered the best punchline of the day. Clifton didn't even lift his head. He waved his hand toward me, as though brushing away a nuisance. "Eudora, stop making scenes over little things. You don't need spa treatments. You'll embarrass the family if you push it." The cabana roared with laughter, Darius chuckling loudest as he patted his own stomach, and said she'd need 3 attendants to get the job done. Felicia cackled at that, her sharp voice bouncing across the water. Around us, other guests pretended not to notice, their eyes sliding away politely. But the staff? I saw the way Hector Alvarez stiffened at the bar, his jaw tightening as though he had heard every word. I saw a server lower her eyes when she approached with another round of drinks. They knew what my family did not, that the woman being mocked so freely was the only reason any of them were standing here. I stood in silence, letting their laughter roll and echo, my spa pass still in hand. To argue would only feed their spectacle. To demand respect from those determined to deny, it would be wasted breath. Instead, I simply folded the pass, slipped it into my bag, and walked slowly back toward my room. Behind me, I heard Sonia mutter, "Always so dramatic," and Clifton's low chuckle in agreement. The sting of humiliation pressed heavy against my chest, but with it came a sharp, steady certainty. Every insult, every sneer, every time they measured me by weight, by room size, by food choice, it was all piling up like kindling. And they were too blind to realize that they were the ones striking the matches. Their laughter followed me down the hallway, but so did the memory of my grandfather's words. "Keep what I give you separate." If only they knew how separate my world already was. That night, the hotel's hallways were quieter, the laughter and clinking glasses from dinner fading into muted echoes. I had excused myself early, claiming I was tired. But in truth, I simply wanted to be away from the endless boasting that had filled the table. The air in my small room felt stifling. So I wandered down the corridor, letting the hush of the late evening settle my thoughts. As I approached the lounge, I slowed. 2 familiar voices drifted from within, low but sharp enough to carry in the stillness. I stopped just beyond the doorway, hidden by the shadows, and listened. "Once Dad passes," Darius was saying, his tone smug, "we'll liquidate the estate fast. No point dragging things out with probate. The properties alone will give us more than enough capital. Clifton's laugh followed, deep and satisfied. Exactly. Between the rentals, the accounts, and my insurance, you and Sonia will be set for life. Malcolm's portion will keep him afloat, though Felicia will probably spend it all on handbags and hair salons. Both men chuckled. My hand tightened against the doorframe. And her? Darius asked after a beat, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from certainty. What about your wife? You plan to leave her anything beyond the house? Clifton scoffed, as if the idea itself was ridiculous. Eudora? Please. She wouldn't know what to do with it. The old woman's never managed a dime in her life. I built this family. She just stood beside me. She'll be fine with whatever scraps are left, if she even outlives me. Their laughter stung more than I expected, but it was Darius's next words that burned. Honestly, she's dead weight. No investments, no business, no income of her own. Once you're gone, she'll fade out of the picture. She doesn't matter, Clifton. Never has. Clifton chuckled again, the sound of agreement. You're right. And she knows it. That's why she stays quiet. She has nothing. I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying the sharp rhythm of my heart. They were so certain, so blind. The hotel around them, the very lounge where they sat drinking, the staff who served their glasses, all of it existed under my name. Yet in their minds, I was invisible, irrelevant, nothing more than a body to be mocked and discarded. Once the paperwork clears, Clifton continued, I'll make sure Bernard ties everything up neatly. The kids will have the control. Eudora won't even be consulted. I nearly laughed aloud at that, the irony of him invoking Bernard's name. The very lawyer who had safeguarded my inheritance for decades, sworn to me alone. But I swallowed it down, letting silence cloak me. Darius poured another drink. I heard the clink of glass against glass. To the future, then. To finally getting what we deserve. To what we built, Clifton echoed, his pride filling every syllable. Their glasses clinked, sealing an agreement made on the foundation of arrogance and ignorance. I turned and walked back the way I had come, careful not to let my footsteps echo. Back in my room, the noise of the laundry machines pressed against the walls again, steady and relentless. But inside me, something else was just as steady, the rising flame of resolve. They thought I had nothing. They thought I would fade into the background, forgotten once Clifton was gone. But the truth was waiting in those sealed documents, in the trust my grandfather had placed in me, in the wealth they mocked me for never having. Let them keep scheming in the dark. Soon enough, the light would expose every shadow. And when it did, their laughter would choke in their throats. The next afternoon, the family gathered by the beachside patio for drinks and more boasting. Clifton sat in his usual command position, glass in hand, while Sonia and Malcolm traded stories of new contracts, new purchases, new successes. Felicia's laughter rang high and sharp every time she added her commentary. I listened quietly, but after a while, I excused myself, slipping away toward the gardens. I found Sarai and Micah sitting on the stone bench beneath a canopy of hibiscus flowers, their little legs swinging as they whispered back and forth. They looked up when they saw me, and their faces lit with the kind of warmth I never received from their parents. "Grandma," Sarai called, scooting closer to make room. "Sit here with us." I lowered myself onto the bench, my joints aching, but my heart lightened by their smiles. Micah pressed a seashell into my palm, one he had collected that morning. "I saved this for you," he said proudly. I turned it over in my hand, the ridges catching the sunlight. "It's beautiful, Micah." "Thank you." For a moment, we sat in companionable silence, the waves rolling softly in the distance. Then Sarai looked up at me, her small brow furrowed in thought. "Grandma, why do you let them laugh at you?" Her question caught me off guard. I glanced down at her, at the innocent eyes searching mine. "What do you mean, baby?" "Daddy and Aunt Sonia," she said carefully, "they make fun of you. They laugh about your food, your clothes. Even Grandpa laughs. Why don't you ever tell them to stop?" Micah's voice joined in, sharper than his sister's. "Yeah, if someone laughed at me like that, I'd say something back. You just sit there quiet." I exhaled slowly, fighting the sting that rose in my chest. Out of the mouths of children came the truths adults tried to ignore. They had seen everything. I reached for their hands, holding them both in mine. "Sometimes," I said gently, "the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet. Not because you're weak, but because you're waiting for the right moment." Sarai tilted her head. "The right moment for what?" "For people to understand what they never wanted to see," I answered. The two exchanged glances, their young faces filled with the kind of confusion that only time could clear. "So one day they'll stop laughing?" Micah asked. I squeezed his hand. "One day you'll understand. And when that day comes, you'll see why I waited." They fell silent, digesting my words with the seriousness only children could muster. Finally, Sarai leaned against my arm, her small body warm against mine. "I like you just the way you are, Grandma," she whispered. "And I like you," I replied, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. "Both of you, more than anything." As the ocean breeze rustled through the flowers, I looked at their faces, their innocence untouched by greed, their love untainted by ambition. It was then the decision solidified inside me. Everything I had kept hidden, everything my grandfather had trusted me with, it would not go to Sonia or Malcolm or their greedy spouses. It would go to these children, the only ones who had seen me not as a burden but as family. They deserved better than to become replicas of their parents. And I would make sure of it. When I rose to my feet, Sarai and Micah followed, each holding one of my hands. To anyone watching, we looked like nothing more than a grandmother strolling with her grandchildren. But in my heart, I knew the truth. They were my legacy, and they were my revenge. The morning of the yacht outing began with excitement that wasn't mine. Sonia and Felicia were buzzing around the lobby in wide-brimmed hats and oversized sunglasses, posing for pictures against the marble columns. Darius checked his watch every other minute, reminding everyone of the boarding time. Malcolm strutted about, bragging about his sea legs as if he were a seasoned sailor. Clifton barked at the staff to make sure the champagne and hors d'oeuvres were packed. And me, my name never made it onto the manifest. I discovered it when the concierge called out the list of confirmed guests. Sonia and Darius, Malcolm and Felicia, Clifton, a handful of cousins. My name wasn't there. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I was told." Felicia cut me off, her voice carrying across the polished lobby. "Oh, didn't anyone tell her?" "There wasn't enough space." "Poor planning, I guess." She smirked and leaned into Sonia, who covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Anyway, Felicia added louder, "It's probably for the best. The yacht might have sunk with all that extra weight." The laughter that followed was merciless, and it carried all the way to the glass doors as they exited. Clifton didn't look back once, not to check on me, not to notice I stood alone in the middle of the lobby as if I were an afterthought. When the engines of the yacht roared to life in the distance, I turned quietly and walked back through the corridors, their absence settling over me like a sudden calm. For the first time all week, the hotel was mine again. No voices mocking my food, no eyes measuring my body, no laughter cutting at me like blades. Just silence, steady and forgiving. The family returned from the yacht glowing with wine and sun, their voices carrying through the hotel corridors as they bragged about the trip. I stayed in my room, unnoticed as always, until the last of their chatter faded. Only then did I rise, smoothing my dress, and make my way down the back hallway to the office reserved for private business meetings. The staff knew better than to question why I had access to it. Hector had already ensured the room was prepared. A single lamp glowed on the polished oak desk, its light falling over stacks of papers neatly arranged. Waiting by the window was Bernard Knox. He looked exactly as he had the last time we met, tall, deliberate, with silver hair combed back and a briefcase in hand. His presence carried the weight of discretion and authority, the kind of man who could hide a fortune in plain sight for decades and never let a whisper escape. "Mrs. Ward," he greeted, bowing his head slightly. "It's good to see you." "Bernard," I replied softly, closing the door behind me. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to the chair opposite the desk, and once I sat, he placed the briefcase before me and snapped it open. Inside were files thicker than I expected, neatly bound with colored tabs. He lifted the top one, sliding it toward me. "These," he said, "are the current documents confirming your ownership of Hotel Miramar. The deeds remain untouched in your name alone. No other claims have been filed." I traced the embossed seal, the paper firm beneath my fingertips. Proof. Bernard opened another folder. "Here are the updated certificates of stock ownership, several portfolios, diversified as your grandfather arranged. These have multiplied substantially since his passing. And here," he tapped the last binder, "are property titles, 3 estates, all secured under your authority." I inhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in. My husband had built a facade of wealth, enough to keep our children dazzled, but compared to this, his estate was a shadow, and he never knew it. Bernard's eyes settled on me. "You are in control of far more than your family realizes. The question, Mrs. Ward, is whether you're ready to make it known." I met his gaze, the weight of the years pressing against me. For decades, I had endured silence, mockery at the table, humiliation in public, my husband's arrogance, my children's scorn. My grandfather had told me to wait until I saw their true nature. Now I had. "Yes," I said firmly. "It's time." Bernard closed the files with a quiet snap. "Then we must choose the stage. The gala dinner tomorrow evening will provide the perfect audience. Everyone will be present, and once the documents are presented, there will be no denying your authority." I pictured the dining hall, glittering under chandeliers, my family at the long table boasting, as always. I imagined the hush that would fall when Bernard entered, when Hector confirmed, when the weight of the truth dropped like stone into water. For once, their laughter would die in their throats. My lips curved into the faintest smile. The gala it is. Bernard nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. I'll have everything prepared. But understand, after this, there will be no going back. The deference you've kept hidden will come into the light. They'll see you differently, some with shame, some with anger. I know, I said, my voice steady, but I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for Sarai and Micah, for the legacy my grandfather entrusted me with, and for myself. Bernard gathered the folders and returned them to his case. Then tomorrow night the silence ends. As he left the office, the weight of his words settled into me. Tomorrow I would stop being the shadow they mocked. Tomorrow I would become the storm they never saw coming. The gala dinner was everything my family adored. Grand chandeliers, polished marble floors, tables draped in linen as white as untouched snow. Waiters moved in choreographed lines, balancing trays of champagne and plated hors d'oeuvres. The Ward family was seated at the long central table, exactly where Clifton believed we belonged. I took my assigned seat at the far end, nearly swallowed by the floral centerpiece that blocked the view of half the table. As always, my place had been chosen carefully, visible enough to be acknowledged, hidden enough to be forgotten. Clifton rose first, glass in hand. The room stilled, the murmur of voices folding into silence as he lifted his chin and let his words roll out with practiced confidence. A toast, he declared, his deep voice carrying across the hall. To family, to legacy, and to the future of the Ward name. I have spent my life building this foundation, and when I am gone, my children will carry it forward. My will guarantees it. Sonia and Malcolm will inherit what I've worked for. And with their success, this family will thrive for generations. The applause was immediate, led by Sonia and Malcolm, their faces glowing with pride. Darius clapped hard, grinning wide as though the speech were his own victory. Felicia leaned back in her chair, her smirk sharp as she raised her glass. I lowered my gaze to the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered edges with my fingertip. Clifton hadn't spoken my name once. Not in acknowledgement, not in gratitude. His legacy ended with our children, as though I were nothing more than the empty vessel that carried them. Let's not forget, Darius chimed in, his voice loud and smug, what made all this possible. He turned his eyes toward me, his grin widening. After all, every great family has someone who sacrifices. And in our case, Eudora contributed plenty. The laughter started before he finished, but he pressed on anyway. Wait and whining. Isn't that right? The roar of amusement around the table was deafening. Felicia nearly doubled over, clutching her side. Sonia hid her smile behind her napkin, though her shoulders shook with mirth. Even Malcolm laughed freely, raising his glass toward his father in solidarity. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, letting their ridicule wash over me. Not one of them considered how cruel it sounded to reduce a wife, a mother, a grandmother to nothing more than a punchline. Not one of them paused to wonder if their words might cut deeper than intended. Clifton chuckled, not bothering to rein Darius in. He raised his glass again, pride radiating from him. To my children, he repeated, his voice booming. The pride of this family, the future that will outshine us all. The crystal clinked, the laughter resumed, and I sat quietly at the far end of the table, my glass untouched, Sarai, and Micah shifted uncomfortably beside me, their young faces clouded with confusion. Sarai's small hand crept into mine again, her grip tight, while Micah glared down the table at his father, his jaw clenched. I squeezed their hands gently beneath the tablecloth, my face calm, my voice silent. Let them laugh. Let them toast to themselves, blind and arrogant. The night was theirs, for now. The waiters had just cleared the main course when the sound of polished shoes against marble caught the room's attention. Hector Alvarez, the hotel manager, stepped into the hall carrying a bottle of champagne in his hands. His presence alone was unusual. Managers rarely delivered bottles personally. The conversations faltered as he approached the ward table. Clifton leaned back in his chair, assuming the gesture was another recognition of his supposed importance. Sonia and Malcolm straightened, eager for the display. Felicia whispered something to Darius, both of them grinning, already imagining more flattery. But Hector didn't bow to Clifton. He didn't even glance at Sonia or Malcolm. His eyes sought me out, steady and deliberate, as he placed the champagne on the table directly before me. With the compliments of the house, Madam Ward, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. For the owner. The air snapped tight around us. Forks stilled. Glasses hovered midair. My family froze, as if Hector had spoken a foreign language. Clifton blinked hard, his brow furrowing. "Excuse me?" he demanded. Hector didn't flinch. For Madam Ward, the owner of Hotel Miramar. He gave a short bow in my direction before stepping back. The silence was sharp, almost painful, before Darius broke it with a booming laugh. "Owner," he repeated, slapping the table as if the very idea was comedy. "You must be mistaken, sir. She's a guest, barely that. This must be for Clifton Ward, not," he gestured toward me with a flourish, "her." Sonia's laughter followed, high-pitched and nervous. "Yes, of course. A mix-up. Mom doesn't even know the first thing about owning a business, let alone a hotel." Felicia leaned into Malcolm, smirking. Can you imagine? She couldn't run a lemonade stand. The laughter spread, thin and awkward, clinging to the edges of the table, as if mocking me could erase the tension. Their amusement was forced, desperate, trying to smother the unease Hector had planted with his words. Clifton glared at Hector. "You've made an error. This is not her doing." But Hector simply bowed again, his voice calm. The bottle was requested personally for Madam Ward. No error. He placed crystal glasses around me with deliberate care before retreating, his shoulders straight, his expression unreadable. The hall remained silent. Guests at nearby tables had noticed, their eyes flicking toward us, curiosity pricking at the edges of the evening. I reached for the glass, my hand steady as I poured the champagne. Bubbles rose in the crystal, catching the light. I lifted the glass, slowly, my expression serene. "Madam Ward," Sonia muttered, her face pale. "What nonsense!" Darius laughed again, but it lacked conviction. A little slip of the tongue. These staff, always trying too hard to flatter. Don't let it go to your head. Malcolm forced a chuckle, but his eyes were sharp with unease. Even Felicia shifted in her seat, her smirk faltering. I said nothing. I simply took a slow sip of the champagne, letting the silence stretch, letting their doubt grow heavier by the second. The hall returned to its chatter, but at our table, the air was different now, uneasy, brittle, laced with questions none of them wanted to ask aloud. I placed the glass down carefully, my fingers resting on the rim. Calm, silent, unbothered. The tension was mine to command, and I let it build brick by brick with every beat of their nervous laughter. They thought it was a mistake. I knew it was only the beginning. The hall was still buzzing from Hector's words when the next disruption arrived. The double doors at the back opened quietly, and Bernard Knox entered, his presence as sharp and deliberate as always. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand, his posture straight, his face composed. Most eyes in the room didn't know him, but Clifton did. I saw the recognition flash across his features, a flicker of irritation. "Bernard," he muttered under his breath, shifting in his seat. "What's he doing here?" The lawyer walked directly to our table, ignoring the curious glances that followed him. He stopped just behind my chair, set his briefcase on the table, and snapped open the locks with a clean metallic click. "Good evening," Bernard said, his voice even but carrying easily over the low hum of the hall. "Forgive the interruption, but I've been asked to present some clarifications regarding ownership and inheritance relevant to this family." Clifton stiffened. "This is neither the time nor the place." Bernard cut him off smoothly. "On the contrary, Mr. Ward, it is precisely the right time. The hotel you sit in, the very roof over this dinner, does not belong to you, nor to your children. It belongs solely to Mrs. Eudora Ward." The words detonated like a bomb at the table. Gasps rippled down the line. Sonia's wineglass slipped from her hand, red liquid staining the tablecloth. Malcolm's jaw dropped, and Felicia's smirk dissolved into shock. Bernard continued, pulling out a stack of documents and spreading them neatly before me. He tapped the top page. "Here are the original deeds to Hotel Miramar, transferred decades ago by your grandfather, Don Ernesto, directly into your name. Here are the trust papers securing multiple properties and stock portfolios, likewise placed under your authority." Darius leaned forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible. Clifton built this family. Everyone knows that." Bernard's eyes slid to him, cool and unbothered. "Clifton Ward's will, which I've reviewed, contains only modest holdings, residential properties, bank accounts, insurance policies. Respectable, yes, but compared to Mrs. Ward's estate, scraps." Clifton slammed his fist on the table, rattling glasses. "You're twisting this, Bernard. My wife has never run a business in her life. She couldn't manage a corner store, let alone." Bernard pulled another folder, this one thinner but even more damning. Evidence of ongoing revenue streams from investments arranged by her grandfather. Stocks that multiplied over decades. Titles to estates that you, Mr. Ward, never knew existed. And before you accuse me further, every page here is notarized, sealed, and filed under the proper jurisdictions. Nothing is forged. Nothing is false. The silence that followed was suffocating. Around us, other tables had gone quiet, the spectacle impossible to ignore. My children sat frozen, their faces stripped of arrogance, replaced by disbelief and dawning horror. Felicia finally spoke, her voice thin. "So, you're saying all this time she had more than... Bernard nodded firmly. "More than Clifton. More than any of you combined. Her grandfather entrusted her, not her husband, not her children. And tonight you sit under her roof at her table." Gasps erupted again, the weight of truth undeniable. Clifton's face had turned red, veins standing out at his temple. Sonia covered her mouth with shaking hands, her eyes darting to me and back to the documents. Malcolm stared straight ahead, lost in the collapse of his certainty. I sat still, my hands folded neatly on the table, watching as the walls they had built against me crumbled one by one. Bernard gathered the last of the papers and placed them firmly in front of me. "Mrs. Ward," he said, bowing his head, "it is time your family sees who has held the true inheritance all along." The silence that followed was no longer filled with laughter. It was filled with the sound of everything they thought they knew turning to dust. The documents lay spread across the table, their weight heavier than the silver platters and crystal glasses surrounding them. My family sat in stunned silence, their laughter smothered, their certainty dissolved. For decades I had endured their words, their ridicule, their dismissal. Now the moment had come. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo through the hall, drawing every eye toward me. I rested my hands lightly on the table, letting the pause stretch until the tension grew unbearable. All these years, I began, my voice calm but sharp. I stayed quiet. I let you mock me. I let you call me simple, cheap, useless. I let you laugh at my weight, my choices, even my very presence. You spoke as if I were invisible, as if I were nothing but a shadow in this family. Sonia lowered her head, her cheeks flushed. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably, but neither spoke. I looked at Clifton, then the man who had toasted his children while pretending I did not exist. "And you," I said, my words cutting clean, "you stood by and encouraged it. You told me not to embarrass the family. You told me to stay small, to stay silent, because in your mind I had nothing of my own." Clifton opened his mouth, but no words came. I didn't give him the chance. "But you were wrong," I continued, my voice rising just enough to carry across the hall. "Because while you were busy building your image, my grandfather had already built a legacy for me. He saw through you from the very beginning. He gave me the Miramar. He gave me the investments. He gave me the security you believed was yours alone. And I kept it hidden, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting." The air trembled with the weight of truth. I turned my gaze to Sonia, to Malcolm, to Felicia, and Darius. I waited to see who you would become. And I saw it: greed, arrogance, cruelty. You laughed at me while plotting to strip me of what you thought was mine. You raised your glasses to each other and lowered me to nothing. Well, hear me now. Nothing is what you will inherit from me. Gasps rippled across the table. Sonia's hand flew to her mouth. Malcolm shook his head in disbelief. Darius muttered a curse under his breath, while Felicia glared as though I had betrayed her instead of the other way around. I straightened, letting my voice harden. Every asset my grandfather entrusted to me has been redirected. The hotel, the properties, the portfolios, all of it is now secured in a trust. Not for you, not for your spouses, not for the arrogant generation that has mocked me for years. That trust is for Sarai and Micah, and Sarai and Micah alone. The children blinked at me, wide-eyed, not fully understanding the magnitude of my words, but their hands tightened in mine. "The terms are clear," I said, my tone final. "The trust will activate only when they come of age. It will bypass every one of you sitting at this table. You will not touch a dollar, not one property, not one share. The wealth you assumed would fall into your laps will never be yours. The silence shattered into chaos. What? Sonia gasped, her voice breaking. You can't, Mom. You can't just cut us out like this. Malcolm slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You're destroying your own family. Felicia sneered, her words dripping with venom. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Darius leaned forward, his face twisted in rage. You'll regret this. You think you can control everything from beyond the grave. I raised my hand, and the noise fell still. This isn't destruction, I said coldly. It's justice. It's protection. I will not let Sarai and Micah grow up to be replicas of you, mocking, greedy, blind. They will know dignity, they will know patience, and they will know the value of legacy, not arrogance. Clifton's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Eudora, how could you? I met his eyes without flinching. How could I not? The hall fell silent again. The decision was made. The lines had been drawn. And for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Fear that the woman they mocked as powerless had just cut them out of everything they ever thought was theirs. The chandelier's glow seemed colder now, as though the light itself recoiled from the wreckage that had unfolded at the long table. My words hung in the air, and the papers Bernard Knox left stacked neatly before me glared like silent witnesses. Clifton's face had lost all color. He sat rigid, his mouth open, yet no defense came. For decades, he had lived as the head of the Ward family, his authority unquestioned, his word final. Now, before his children, in-laws, and cousins, that image shattered like glass underfoot. Sonia broke first. Tears streaked her face, her voice trembling as she leaned across the table. Mother, please don't do this. We were wrong. Yes, but this is too much. Don't cut us off like beggars. Her desperation only highlighted how hollow her superiority had been. She wasn't mourning the cruelty she'd dealt me for years. She was mourning the fortune she had just lost. Malcolm slammed his fist against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. His eyes burned with fury, his voice rising until the entire hall trembled with it. This is insane. You're tearing the family apart over your pride. You think you're powerful now, but you'll regret this when we walk away and leave you to rot alone. Felicia curled her lip in a sneer, shaking her head. Pathetic, she hissed. You've spent your life bitter and jealous. And this is your revenge? Hiding money while pretending to be less than us? You're not a matriarch. You're a fraud. Darius pushed back his chair, so violently it screeched against the marble. He rose, fists clenched, his face flushed with rage. I won't sit here and be humiliated. This family is finished. Without another word, he stormed from the hall, his footsteps pounding like drumbeats of defeat. The rest sat stunned, unsure whether to comfort Clifton or to save face. The hierarchy that had ruled this family for decades, Clifton's dominance, Sonia's pride, Malcolm's arrogance, had been overturned in one night. The woman they mocked, the woman they dismissed as nothing, had seized every ounce of power with nothing more than silence, patience, and a stack of papers. I remained standing at the head of the table now, calm as the storm they never saw coming. Hector and the staff watched from the corners of the room, their eyes filled with a respect my family had never granted me. Sarai and Micah stayed close, their small hands still folded in mine, as if instinctively knowing the truth. The world they would inherit no longer belonged to the adults who sneered and mocked. Clifton lowered his head, humiliated, unable to meet my gaze. His toast about legacy now lay in ruins. The legacy had never been his to give. It was mine, and I had passed it on without his hand, without his blessing. For the first time, silence ruled the Ward family, not my silence, but theirs. And in that silence, their pride collapsed. The hall had emptied, the night's chaos leaving only the faint scent of wine and the hush of shame behind it. My family had retreated to their rooms, some weeping, some cursing, all stripped of the certainty they had carried in with them. I remained behind, seated at the same table where they had once laughed at me, ridiculed me, erased me. Now their voices were gone, and only mine remained. I looked at the documents once more, proof of what had always been mine, proof of what I had already secured for Sarai and Micah. The trust was sealed, the conditions immovable. The wealth and power they had mocked me for not having would never be theirs. Instead, it would leapfrog over their generation, waiting for the only two souls in this family who had shown me love without conditions. I rose and walked slowly to the window, the ocean dark and endless beyond the glass. My reflection stared back at me, steady and unflinching. This wasn't triumph in noise or spectacle. This was triumph in patience, in silence, in enduring humiliation until the right moment came, and then revealing a truth no one could undo. They believed I had nothing. They built their arrogance on that lie. And tonight, I showed them that everything they coveted belonged not to them, but to the very woman they despised. I thought of Sarai's small hand clutching mine, of Micah's quiet questions about why I never fought back. One day, when they were grown, they would understand. They would see that my revenge was never in shouting at those who mocked me, but in ensuring they would never profit from their cruelty. My silence was not weakness. It was the sharpest weapon I carried. The grandchildren were my future. The rest would live the rest of their days with the bitter knowledge that the woman they despised had been their undoing.